Yeah, I didn't go blue. But I like to do blue when I'm on camera. So this is working out very well.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone to our diplomatic dialogues. This is the second in our series of diplomatic dialogues for the academic year. I would like to specially welcome our special guest, Her Excellency Xoliswa Ngwevela, who is the High Commissioner for the Resident High Commissioner for Trinidad and Tobago and non-resident ambassador to several CARICOM countries, Barbados, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Suriname, Guyana, and CARICOM. We are extremely privileged and honored to have Her Excellency present on the topic this afternoon, South Africa's foreign policy and its global relations. South Africa has always been a very important country, as we know, not only for their struggles with apartheid, but for several other very important reasons in most recent times. In its own right as a global player and as a regional player in Africa, as well as its role in the BRICS group. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome the ambassador again to present on this important topic, which is very relevant for the Institute and its stakeholders and our local, regional, and international audience. At this point, I would like to welcome Dr. Karen Niles, who is a lecturer at the Institute of International Relations, to introduce our speaker this afternoon. Dr. Niles.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And a special thank you to Her Excellency Xoliswa Ngwevela. Ambassador Ngwevela studied political science in Russia and has a postgraduate diploma in administrative studies and a master's in public administration from England. And she further her studies, by getting a diploma in international relations and diplomacy in Germany. And in fact, an interesting thing to note here is that she left South Africa in the aftermath of the June 16th, 1976 uprising and became an anti-apartheid activist. And she campaigned in many countries and throughout a number of international fora. And so she traveled throughout Africa, Europe, and the Americas. But upon the accession of a democratically elected government, she joined the ANC, I believe. When they formed the government, she would have joined the Department of Foreign Affairs, now called the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, DIRCO. In 1988, she headed the Foreign Service Institute, now named the Diplomatic Academy, before serving as Consul General to New York in 1999 to 2004. From 2004 to 2009, she served as ambassador to Venezuela and non-resident to Colombia. Ambassador Ngwevela then served in various capacities in DIRCO for 5 years and was the chief director of the Diplomatic Academy until early 2016. She has been appointed as the new High Commissioner, Ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago, and the non-resident ambassador to Barbados, Guyana, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Grenadines, and Suriname. And she just heard from Dr. Montoute. Now, as one of the few rugby fans in Trinidad and Tobago, I would also like to take the opportunity to wish Ambassador Ngwevela and all of South Africa a hearty congratulations for winning the World Cup, which was played last year, and was a well sought out victory. And so without any further ado, of course, I give you Ambassador Ngwevela. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Niles, for this introduction, having heard this wealth of experience that Her Excellency Xoliswa Ngwevela has. We are very honored and privileged to hear from her what South Africa's foreign policy and its global relations are. So welcome and thank you very much, Ambassador, for your presence here this afternoon. We look very much to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Montut. And thank you also to Dr. Karen Niles for the very warm introduction. I also want to thank the Institute of International Relations for inviting me. I have kept a very strong friendship with the Institute over the last 4.5 years. And I'm very happy to be here today to present on South Africa's foreign policy and its relations with the world. But I just thought perhaps before we go to foreign policy matters, I would love to just give a very quick overview on just a few statistics. We don't have a lot of time, so they are really sketchy. So I will just go through that very quickly. Need I mention, by the way, I would like to thank all of the attendees, the students from U.W.I, the academic community here, and international participants who have joined this virtual meeting, my fellow diplomats. And I also saw on the screen that we also have a participant from South Africa. Thank you for joining us. And of course, not the least, the government representatives from TT who are participating here today. After my short presentation, I will have an opportunity for people to ask questions. So please do note your question, put it down when the time comes. Hopefully it is a question I will be able to answer. Just then on the very quick overview introduction, I think I'm dealing with a very educated audience here, so I don't really have to deal with what is foreign policy. But in a nutshell, really, it is about a government strategy in dealing with its relationship with other countries and international institutions. But a few important economic data on South Africa. We are a country of about 58.5 million people and counting. And it is comprised demographically of 80% African and 8.4% white and about 8.8% colored. I know in other countries that word would not, you wouldn't finish a sentence without being in trouble, but it's an accepted definition in South Africa, people of mixed race. And then you also have the Indian community, Asian and other Chinese, and so on and so forth. Our GDP last year was 359. I have no doubt 2020 is going to be very, very low because of COVID, shutdown of business and everything. And then, of course, from that, the tax revenue is 5.6 billion. And that is what we spend on services, education, health, infrastructure, just generally all the services that taxpayers have to pay for from the government's pocket, so to say. 23 million people are fully employed, but of course we've got a very, very high unemployment rate of up to 30%, which is very tragic because with COVID, the statistics are very dire. Moving forward. Okay, so the major products that South Africa produces will be in this map, and these are the regions that are destined for South African goods. South America, as you can see, we are very big on automotive manufacturing. All the companies in the world have got factories, Mercedes, Toyota, Hyundai, and so on. Energy, biofuels, mining products, infrastructure services, engineering. Then North America, lots of chemical and precious metals and machineries. There's something called AGOA product list. Those are the things we sell to the United States. Where if you have time, you can go to the internet and look at those. To Africa, that's what we sell. To Europe, Western Europe particularly, that's what we sell. Middle East, that's what we sell. And then, of course, Central and Eastern Europe, and then Asia. And of course, our famous wines to the rest of the world. They are very popular. I thought this map will really give you a quick rundown of the economy. So that's about it. And now let's get to the subject of foreign policy. All right. Be patient with us a little bit. I'm getting help from elsewhere, so I hope that's the correct slide, right? All right. This South African foreign policy emanates from the President of South Africa, who holds the responsibility for international relations. So he delegates this responsibility to the minister in accordance with the cabinet portfolio. And then the minister appoints the Director General, who will then run the department that advises her and that leads and coordinates South Africa's international relations. What informs South Africa's foreign policy? It definitely has to come from the National Development Plan, because foreign policy has to be informed by the domestic needs of the country. It cannot simply be based on an undetermined agenda. So the National Development Plan, in what is called Outcomes 11, if you like, you can call it Chapter 11, which asks the Department of International Relations to work towards creating a better South Africa and contribute to a better and safer Africa in a better world. That's the nutshell of the mandate. And that is what is in our 5-year strategic plan. So the key factors in this plan is promoting the African agenda, which is basically Africa's development, sustainable development, more precisely. It's about the political and economic integration of the sub-region, the 15 countries that comprise SADC. Those are within our immediate region. In Africa, as you probably see later on when you see the maps, we've got 5 regions. We've got North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, and Southern Africa. So these are economic regions. So South Africa's priority is focus in ensuring that this region is integrated And also we develop together. We don't develop one at the expense of another. South-South relations, we'll go into details on all of these later. And then, of course, forming also strong ties with strategic formations of the North, historical ties with the North, mostly with Western Europe. And then, of course, the being very, very active participants in the global system of governance. Last but not least is to promote strong bilateral political and economic relations with all countries around the world. We've gone through this, I think, already. The key national priorities in South Africa today are education, rural development, job creation, health, and reducing crime. So when we canvass as diplomats in terms of opportunities for cooperation with South Africa, we bear in mind that these are the areas where we direct cooperation, and we also direct foreign investment, particularly on job creation with foreign investment, because that's where you get the jobs. And of course, with more jobs, you reduce crime. So these are important priorities in our international agenda. We have three major challenges in our country. You've seen the statistics. 30.1% unemployment is unacceptable. Poverty levels are very high. About 50+% of South Africans still live below the poverty line. And inequality is very stuck, socio-economic opportunities in all areas of life. And then, of course, our role as diplomats is to ensure that we coordinate all of these priorities, align and coordinate and manage them, and monitor developments in the international environment to see how we can leverage to grow our country. Again, it's one of those slides I think you can read, but I think the important thing about diplomacy and our role as diplomats in promoting South Africa's interests is to also conduct the other auxiliary functions that we have to perform, like economic diplomacy goes with trade and economic development. Public diplomacy is where we promote people-to-people relations, not just government to government. Public diplomacy is about promoting people-to-people relations in the field of arts and culture, and ensuring that people have opportunities to share each other's heritages. We also have to advise on international law and act as South Africa's custodians of South Africa's international agreements. Where South Africa has any international agreement, diplomats have to ensure that we exercise fiduciary and custodianship of those agreements. Consular services, every country has got citizens all around the world. So our missions abroad take care of its citizens abroad. When they want to renew their passports, they want to register the births of their children who are South Africans but who are born abroad. They want to register their marriages. South Africans get married to somebody abroad. They want to register that marriage in South Africa as well. All of those things, these are things that diplomats and diplomatic missions have to offer. And more importantly, we have trends internationally of distress. You know, you get citizens who find themselves in distress situation. A person leaves the country and will win romance, and the romance doesn't work out, and they get stranded abroad. They want to go home. COVID is one very important example of that. Airlines, they just shut down without any notice, and people were stranded abroad. So we had to make means for people to travel back to their countries during the pandemic. And some of them also didn't even have money, so they had to be assisted financially and get a loan that they will pay later when they get back home. So these are some of the, but South Africa in the world is basically, South Africa's position in the world is informed by our values. And these values are derived from our history and our legacy. As you know, that we have a very long history of colonization, and in the latter years of colonization, a very vicious system of apartheid. So decolonization and dealing with removing the legacy of apartheid has been forming part of that, the deconstruction and the building of a new society. That's been a very important pillar in our foreign policy. We formed many alliances around the world. The anti-apartheid movement, I cannot think of a bigger political movement in the world like the worldwide anti-apartheid movement. So that's part of South Africa's history, and that is what South Africa brought to the table, bringing people together to fight injustices. But I'm sure now we are part of the world that also fight injustices everywhere else where it exists today. The values of Ubuntu. The values of Ubuntu are very, really simple. Ubuntu means I am because you are. And I think the most simple term to describe that is, you know, you can't put your hand in a tap to wash it, just one hand. You need another hand to wash it. So the two hands have to rub together to be clean. So those are the values we have to work together. And of course, our principle of Ubuntu, meaning that we always put people first in everything that we do, in diplomacy, not just in government, but in this case, in diplomacy. We have to recognize that states are interdependent. We have to promote cooperation over competition and collaboration over confrontation in resolving conflicts around the world. We commit more to development partnerships rather than engaging in conspiracies to destroy other people. We draw on the spirit of internationalism, Pan-Africanism, and South-South solidarity. South-South solidarity, I mean, most members of the South come from the same history as we do. So that solidarity continues. Countries who were formerly colonized, and of course, countries who supported us, because not everybody in the South-South is a former colony. It also involves countries who were with us, who gave material solidarity to all peoples fighting injustices around the world. I will move on. The geopolitics of today's diplomacy is being implemented in a highly dynamic and challenging environment. I cannot think of a more fluid foreign policy environment than in the world today, than today's foreign policy environment. It is changing very fast. It needs states to be pragmatic. It needs states to be open-minded and to form alliances. It has to move towards a world where there is no them and us. And we are not quite yet there yet. It's still a them and us world. But I think that the current environment allows us, and it is opening avenues towards working together in a multilateral rather than a unilateral foreign policy environment. For the first time since the end of the Second World War, there are also divisions that are emerging in traditional alliances, which is one of the things that is changing the foreign policy environment in the world. I think the last 4 years of the spectacle, if we may call it that, in the United States has actually created a new environment for the world to work in a different manner. The United States has separated itself from its traditional allies. And I think to some extent, this did create a much more amicable, a much more, let me say, a Europe that is willing to engage without obstructions from Washington. We also see the rise of anti-establishment movements. These are really movements that are different in every region. In North America, it is the wannabe fascists, I call them, the new right, and the neo-fascist movement. In Africa, we are faced with the remnants, if you may call it, the relocation of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, particularly now they are in the North African, in the Sahara Desert, countries like Mali and Niger, and you could also say the Islamic or Islamist movement within Nigeria is also allied to that in Somalia. And they are very close to our border now in Mozambique. Just this last week, 50 people were beheaded by an Islamist movement in a small village in Mozambique. So these are the new challenges, and it's a very difficult, it's a guerrilla war, as you can imagine, but also in North Africa, it is a resident that has occupied territories, and they're taking advantage of the desolation of the desert, which they are accustomed to. And of course, the new player in the international space is China. Not so new anymore, I might say, because China has been a long-standing friend of the developing countries. That makes a lot of people nervous. China is beginning to emerge as the new investor in Africa particularly, but also China is the second largest economy in the world today. And it produces sophisticated technology, sophisticated infrastructure, and they're willing to support other developing nations, and that is not sitting very well. Hence the many tensions between China and the North, particularly the United States. Oh, where am I? Am I moving back? Oh, yes, I am. I'm holding it the wrong way, sorry. The other features in geopolitics today, the nature of conflict and conflict resolution within the region. The Middle East tensions continue. I think the game changer was what was known as the Arab Spring at the time, and it really introduced a new era of conflict within that region. The scramble for Africa continues, and in a renewed manner. And I listened the other day to a very, very, I was gobsmacked to listen to a virtual. I attended, no, I didn't attend that one. I got a video from somebody, yes. A lecture by a certain Dutch gentleman. And he was giving this lecture about what Africa means to Europe. And he was very blunt, he was very blatant, very right-wing. And he made it very clear what the plan is. And he says, we need to keep Africa exactly where it is. It must remain poor. It must remain unviable economically, so that we can continue as Europe to exploit the mineral, the raw materials. And he made it very emphatic. You cannot put foreign direct investment. You cannot transfer intellectual property and technology to Africa, because the next thing they will be competing with you. So you have to keep them there where they are. Foreign direct investment is not going to assist the development agenda of the North. So these are some of the new trends, blatant trends that are coming out of some actors in Europe. It's not a new thing, but it simply tells you that the scramble for Africa continues. And we are on our own as Africans. And we do need to realize that and come with strategies that will work for Africa. We talk about foreign direct investment all the time. And it's not coming fast and furious. If anything, it's really dwindling. It's not growing. So we need to rethink. Yes, there is some foreign direct investment, but how significant and how fundamental is the type of, how organic, or at least, you know, that type of investment, are we getting the right type of investment coming into the continent? So these are, then of course, the role of non-state actors today in the international scene is very, very important. And they provide a service that governmental organizations are unable to do. And I think they've become also much more effective than the old traditional, what did we call it, by the way? You know, the development agencies that were also non-governmental. The new non-state actors, they're much more specialized, like Doctors Without Borders and such organizations. So they need to have a space and in the debating table within, not just in Africa, but in the international system. In Africa, the centrality of Africa is very important to South Africa's foreign policy. In fact, that was established 25 years ago in 1994, when we became a free country, that South Africa cannot and will not be able to grow as an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. And therefore, it is very important in everything that we do in our foreign policy around the world. We do not work to benefit South Africa alone, or we do not work to undermine the efforts of other countries within the continent, and that we have remained true to. South-South cooperation is a very important pillar of our foreign policy, because in South-South you've got global emerging powers like Brazil, India, China, plus Russia, who has been a long-time ally of former liberation movements or liberation movements during the colonial struggles. We have new alliances forming with Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We've got space to influence the new global system as countries of the South. The South also is the natural allowance of other emerging and middle powers, like those countries who are not necessarily members of the non-aligned movement, for example, or the G77, but they are still important. Countries like South Korea, for example, and other countries in Asia and South America. We also have to reconfigure the structure of power in international relations, and we participate as a country in all fora to ensure that really the world moves forward and the space for underserved and least developed countries, emerging economies, the space opens up in the UN system, in the Security Council, for everybody to be heard. I'm sure a lot of you participants have heard about BRICS, and this stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I hate to call it the G7 of the South, but because the ethos is different. I'm simply comparing to G7 because it is the size of and the number of countries that are involved. These are 5 countries that are really trying to leverage their advantage as the alternative and as the emerging economic power in the South, and to build and to develop structures that would actually serve not just the 5 members, but serve the interests, economic and political interests of many countries and the regions to which we belong. Multilateralism, I think this is South Africa takes multilateralism very, very seriously. And I heard Jeffrey Sachs speaking at the Vatican. I think he's a very renowned and I think credible American analyst. He said that the Vatican recently that this is the best time for multilateralism. You know, I'm not quoting him verbatim, but we have to recognize and acknowledge that it is kicking and alive, because you see, when we keep denying it, we are actually creating space for mischief. Nothing is stopping us in the multilateral environment and those who are advocating for multilateralism to succeed in what it is doing. Because you cannot let one country stand in the way of everybody else. if you as a country want to move ahead and do what you want to do, we need to go ahead and do it. Just do it. If somebody says, no, I do not agree, okay, let them stand aside. And that's probably just one. So if they don't want to move with the rest of everybody else, so I think multilateralism within that context, we should not create a track for a battle for multilateralism when everybody agrees. Let the one who doesn't agree catch up. So I think that is the long and short of it on multilateralism. But we have presence in all multilateral institutions, and those are on the board. I will not repeat them. And I am sure the list is not endless, because, yes, definitely a few left out. Economic diplomacy, I've included economic diplomacy as a special form of diplomacy because today you got all kinds of diplomacy. I mentioned public diplomacy earlier. There's also sports diplomacy. Economic diplomacy is really one of the key pillars today. Political diplomacy, it's there, and I think it works very well within the multilateral environment. And I think a lot of countries are able to be like-minded politically on a lot of things because of the strength within the African Union, for example, in our case, and also the strength within the coalitions and the caucuses within the UN system, for example. If you take the G77, these are like-minded countries that are able to agree and come on resolutions to support within the UN. But economic diplomacy is a different form in the sense that it focuses on promoting the economic development interests of the country, trade promotion, tourism, investment, technology transfer. And I think it works best, particularly within the bilateral environment. South Africa being able to talk to Japan, for example, directly and target specific development interests where we want cooperation with Japan. In the case of TT, to target specific sectors where either South Africa becomes an investor here or we also either buy certain products maybe from TT. I must confess though that when it comes to economic diplomacy, we have very serious challenges when it comes to South America, Central America, including the Caribbean, and Africa, because we are all competing for the same resources. We all want to sell products. We all want foreign direct investment coming to our countries. And so we are all looking at the same investor, the same buyer, etc. So, and hence you find that sometimes there is very little trade happening within the South or between countries of the South. But that picture is gradually changing. I don't have the statistics right now. If you look at South Africa, for example, when we came in 1994, there was zero trade with Africa. And today, Africa is I think it's number 5 trading partner in terms of in global trade terms. So that picture has changed. And I believe we can change it. We can improve our trade with South America. We can improve our trade with the Caribbean. So economic diplomacy is where we have to work hardest as diplomats. And one of the things I found are very important, if any trade between two countries has to happen, you got to have an airline flying there. Or you've got to have direct shipping going to those countries. So if we can address those things, I think we are on our way to intra-trade within the least developed or the emerging economies. I have in mind the organization like Iowa, which I put on the chart earlier. Iowa is the Indian Ocean Rim Association. It was created precisely to increase and improve the infrastructure of all countries that are sharing the Indian Ocean. That is the rest of East Africa, all the way to India, back to Mauritius and the Seychelles and the Madagascars and so on, to ensure that we become a zone for economic development and prosperity. So economic diplomacy is a very important pillar in bilateral relations, but of course it also applies to our relations within the context of the World Trade Organization and other economic institutions. I don't have to explain anymore why that. I'm trying to rush the time now so that I give people an opportunity to participate. Well, this is who really we are in the world. This is what we are attempting to do as a country in all our representation around the world, be it multilateral or bilateral. We have 124 diplomatic missions across all continents and international bodies. And it is always, I remember, you know, at head office, I think any other country will tell you, you know, when you send an ambassador to a country to represent abroad and you come back, you were told when you left the country, you are there to ensure that South Africa becomes a better place and to bring the bacon home. But what happens is that you fall in love with the country where you are sent. And then your minister looks at you and said, do you actually remember who you represent? Are you representing Trinidad or South Africa? Because, you know, you come with all these wonderful impressions and how good Trinidad and Tobago is. So you do get caught in the middle. But I think at the end of the day, in diplomacy, we all work to cooperate, not to undermine each other's interests. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, that was so very excellent and insightful. And thank you very much for this.
Pleasure.
I was particularly struck by the values that you listed on which your foreign policy is based, especially the first to decolonization, deconstruction, and Ubuntu. Very impressive. And what struck me or what stayed with me was that this foreign policy agenda apparently has filtered down to other actors like within universities, because I know that there is work happening at the University of Johannesburg in line with this general principle. So quite impressive and quite an example for us to follow. I must, I'm turning back to the, well, I was speaking to the audience at the same time, but in terms of the question and answer session, you have an opportunity to pose your questions via two channels. You may type your questions or you may use the raise hand feature, and your question is going to be picked up and you will have an opportunity to actually ask a question directly. Ambassador, the questions are coming fast and furious, and they started coming very early in the presentation.
Oh.
So the first question is from Dr. Karen Niles, and he asked, how does the government balance the very individualized rights against more communal notions of rights, ranging from intellectual property to human rights. So I'm going to ask about 3 questions at a time, if that is okay with you, Ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the first question.
Okay, repeat the first one. The notions of rights.
Yeah, how do you balance very individualized rights against more communal notions of rights?
Okay.
And then he said that ranges from, you know, from intellectual property to human rights. The second question is from Miss Kerry Baines. And she asks, what financial and diplomatic opportunities are available for individuals interested in developing agricultural trade relations with South Africa? And the second question seemed to be a more localized or regional question or related question. She asked, and how do the regional governments plan to ebb the spread of this desert region in the north and purify its water resources?
Ooh, can you repeat that one?
She said, how do regional governments plan to ebb the spread of the desert region in the north and purify its water stream?
Okay, I hope okay.
And the third question.
Oh, what is about the financial and diplomatic opportunities? That was the second. No?
That's the first question from Ms. Kerry Baines.
Okay.
And the second question is about how the government is planning to ebb the spread of the desert region in the north and purify its water stream. And the third question, and we'll end with that third one. The third question is from Dr. Gonzalez. He has 2 questions, but we will leave the second question for the second round of questions. His question is, how does South Africa define the Caribbean?
Okay. That's the third question.
Yes, how does South Africa define the Caribbean? And if the Caribbean is not considered to be part of Latin America, what is the difference in the foreign policy approach to the 2 regions? So the third question, the first one is from Dr. Gonzalez. The third one, sorry, is from Dr. Gonzalez. He poses 2 questions, but we'll leave the second one for the second round of questions. How does South Africa define the Caribbean? And if it is not considered to be part of Latin America, what is the difference in the foreign policy approach to the 2 regions?
Okay. Okay, sorry. Thank you very much. I'm just trying to get a map on the... Okay, let me start with the first one. I'm going to have to be a human rights or rights lawyer to answer this one. But I'm a lay person, I'm a diplomat, so I hope you'll forgive me if you don't get the full answer. But I will have to refer to the South African Constitution and say that, and I would suggest that actually if you have an opportunity, please, it's available online and just look at the Bill of Rights there. And it's one of the most advanced constitutions in the world, I'm told all the time, particularly on the rights of the individual. Because the South African Constitution makes it very clear that individuals have rights. And you also have a special, section on the rights of the child, the rights of women, and of course, all the rights that apply to your individuality are there, including gender, sexual orientation, etc. I don't think, in actual fact, anything in rights that contradicts another right, then a right is no longer a right, Rights also, are not absolute. They have to be negotiated from time to time. For example, if you have a disputed piece of land, somebody owns the land, but for historical reason, that land belonged to a community that was removed because of colonial laws or apartheid laws. The community was removed and the land was sold to an individual, maybe as an agricultural property. So these rights have to be weighed. We have laws in South Africa that actually ensure that when we construct the Land Act or we construct as we are doing right now, the Land Restitution Act, we deal with how do you navigate the individual right? Do you have fair compensation? And what is fair compensation in the case that the land needs to be returned to the community? In the case where you cannot return the land, for example, to the community, which has a right to that land, what restitution are you giving to that community that will be equal to the loss? So that's how you balance right, to ensure that nobody loses. The community doesn't lose, the individual doesn't lose. We have a Human Rights Commission where some of the rights are arbitrated. And we've got other commissions, a land commission that arbitrates on claims for land. We have all kinds of commissions and overlaps. We've got the public protector. If somebody feels that the government is not paying attention to its demand for a particular right to be heard, you go to the public protector. So we have many safeguards to ensure that rights are respected, be they individual or community, including intellectual property. We've got the Companies Act, Intellectual Property Act, etc., etc. So the law really resolves all of those issues. Thank you. The next one was about dealing with the spread of the desert. Okay, I put the map of Africa there for that reason, because, Africa has got up to about 54 countries now, if I'm counting correctly. So this is the map of sub-Sahara Africa. The desert starts to the north where you don't see the map of Africa. So that is the area where the desert is the Sahara Desert, where there is Mali, Niger, Chad, and part of the Sudan, and even part of the Burkina Faso and so on, Mauritania. So these are countries that are facing serious historical challenges with the desert. There are UN regional economic organizations operating there, and there is also the regional economic communities that have an agenda for reversing what is called desertification, to fight the creeping of the desert. So I don't have really a lot of information about the nitty-gritties of what is going on, but I think there is a lot of work going on there. But of course, I mean, the newest thing now is to try to actually create some oasis within the desert, particularly in areas where they are populated by communities. And one such strategy is applied in the Middle East by countries like Saudi Arabia, who have got the means where they have desalination. And I think desalination seems to be the future of reforestation, let me put it that way, to try to bring forests back to, it is expensive, but hopefully over time it might help. But I'm sure environmentalists will tell you that Africa's case in terms of climate change is very, very dire. The desert is creeping, the water resources are not very many, and it is certainly a challenge. If you come to South Africa itself, we've got a mini desert. Namibia has got the Namib. We've got a desert to the north of our country in the Northern Cape. If you show us Southern Africa again. So we do have a bit of a desert around the coast of Namibia, the south of Botswana, and to the north of South Africa. And this is land occupied mainly by, wild animals, and it hits them very, very hard. Elephants, the wild beasts, etc., once water resources run down. But we've started in a very small scale to do desalination because we are a water scarce country in our own right as a country. We need to look for water. We've even thought of investing in the DRC to bring water down to South Africa. But that's a very expensive proposition. From a security point of view, it's going to be a very, very expensive pipeline to secure. So, but that's how desperate the desert situation. Again, I'm going to ask for diplomacy type questions because some of the questions are quite specialized. How does South Africa define the Caribbean? CARICOM is one of the, not just a historical ally of South Africa, but the Caribbean community is predominantly African diaspora. So African diaspora, we call it the sixth region of Africa. That's the kind of relationship we have. I mentioned that we have got 5 regions in Africa, but the African diaspora in the Caribbean and worldwide are part of this 6th region. And in actual fact, we have created a platform within the African Union to open space for the participation of the African diaspora. I know for a fact that the minister told me in August that our cabinet has already approved a strategy on cooperation specifically with CARICOM. So, and I'm hoping that strategy document will be discussed with the CARICOM Secretariat and the CARICOM members, and then it will lead to a cooperation agreement between South Africa specifically and the CARICOM. I think I should end there for now.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The upcoming questions are related to diplomacy, so I'm going to just ask the next one is also from Dr. Anthony Gonzalez. He said that you mentioned Pan-Africanism as an area of salience. He wants to know through what instruments and organizations is South Africa hoping to strengthen Pan-Africanism. And the next question is from one of our students, Ms. Zainab Nakid. She wants to know what are South Africa's interests and priorities in its relations with the European Union, especially in light of the post-Cotonou negotiations. And the third one is also from Dr. Gonzalez. He said you mentioned the rise of far-right movements, and he said that you mentioned that you've seen, the world has seen the rise of white supremacy and white extremist terrorism in the US and elsewhere. What plans does South Africa have to counter the international growth of these movements?
Let me start with Pan-Africanism. I think, you know, as an African, you are an African, you are an African. Pan-Africanism really is an emphasis on your Africanness in my book, let me say. And therefore, I think to put Pan-Africanism in one space or corner to say, where is the Pan-Africanism? Where is it located in our society? It is pervasive. It is everywhere. The African Union is a Pan-African movement, institution. SADC is Pan-African. South Africa is a Pan-African country. So yes, there are specific institutions that you could say their focus is on promoting the Pan-African Institute. We have a Pan-African Institute in South Africa, which is not just for South Africa, but it is a Pan-African, an NGO that promotes Pan-Africanism within the continent. The Pan-African Parliament, for example, which is an arm of the African Union, is headquartered in South Africa. The Pan-African Parliament is supposed to be like any other parliament. You know, the EU has got the EU in Brussels, and then you've got the EU parliamentarians that are in France, I think. I forgot the name of the city. So we have a parliament, in a Pan-African Parliament, where all the political parties, ruling parties, opposition parties, send representatives to sit in the Pan-African Parliament that is based in Johannesburg. As far as the South Africa-EU relations, these are very strong. We have a structured agreement with the EU, which has been there negotiated in the post-1994, because we have got a lot of, there's a lot going between South Africa and Europe and the European Union. Trade, science and technology, you name it. So these negotiations, there's what we call a binational commission that sits every year to look at the common issues where we need to either amend or to advance, to monitor and report. So the EU Commission, SA-EU Commission is there. Post-Cotonou really is another area which involves my other colleagues who are dealing with the multilateral and the African Union. But I know that within the ACP, African, Caribbean, Pacific organizations, we are a coalition in our own right in terms of negotiating our relation with the European Union. In the same way, South Africa has a structured relation with the EU. The ACP is a structured relationship with the EU. So that does not contradict all other agreements maybe that the EU might have. It's a special vehicle to negotiate trade. And this vehicle also has to be consistent with other agreements that we reach within the context of the World Trade Organization. We may even sometimes ask the EU to support us in negotiations at the World Trade Organization. So yes, we do have that structured, and I hope. I think post-Cotonou really, the emphasis want to ensure that the Cotonou Agreement doesn't die. It continues because it served a very good purpose, and we wanted that to continue. And I think all the members of the original agreement, which is the SACP EU, have agreed to continue. And we are in agreement. There was a lot of lobbying amongst the members, and I was engaged with that. I know that all the members of the countries, where I'm accredited, you know, there's a round robin that has been going on with South Africa, with the African Union, about the future of the Cotonou Agreement. And eventually we all came to an agreement that that will continue. About the rise of the right, I think these movements take different shapes according to their domestic history. The right in Germany will have its characteristics from the right in Europe or the right in Africa for that matter, you know. Sometimes we have a very, very different notion of what is right and what is left, you know. If at all you stand for justice, they say you're on the left, you know, because you are, you are against injustice, you are fighting oppression, you want to remove the remnants of apartheid and color, all these ones are on the left. And then sometimes then we ask ourselves, okay, who's on the right? So in Africa, sometimes it's not clearly defined who is the right. And therefore, it's a bit of a stretch for us to develop a strategy to fight the right in America or Germany. But I think within the South African context, we are a democracy. We've got up to about 13 parties in parliament. Somewhere there would be parties that you would call parties that are on the right. I think they still have maybe some dreams about the good old days, you know, apartheid days. So they think they can bring a little bit of that back, but they're in parliament and they are ahead. And that's why they always lose, because they don't represent the will of the people. Some have got 1 seat, 2 seats, 3 seats, and the majority party has got a very big lead in terms of votes. Even the opposition party is a distant second, you know. They'll need 40% of the votes to catch up with the majority party. So, yeah, so we don't really need a specific strategy because we have a national strategy, which is the National Development Plan. And that plan is adopted by Parliament. And that once we stick to the plan where we want to take the country, we just make sure that nobody sabotages that plan. It doesn't matter whether they're sitting on the right or they're sitting in the moon, just make sure that they don't get into your path of reaching your national development goals. I think sometimes if you get too caught up in the theoretical debate, you'll end up doing nothing. You have to bring your strategy to reality. How does this translate into providing for the poor people, people who need housing, people who need land, people who need toilets, water, building schools and clinics, etc. You know? So that's the plan. Your strategy is to make sure, stay on course and bring your people on par until they reach the status of a developed nation. And that's where we're going.
Ambassador, for your care in dealing with those questions so thoroughly. I hear your heart in some of those questions. I have never said or thought about that in terms of when an ambassador speaks, but I hear your heart for people and a people-centered approach to whatever South Africa is doing. At this point, we are going to switch a bit and take some questions from the room, as well as directly from our participants from Zoom using the raise hand feature, as I said. So we will take 2 questions from Professor Jessica Byron, who's in the room with us. And then if there are questions from the audience, we are going to take a round of questions from there as well. So Professor Byron, you can go ahead with your questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hi, Commissioner. This is a great pleasure. We don't always have the opportunity to hear enough perspectives from the South, and certainly not enough perspectives from Africa. And I think that this has been a very refreshing glimpse into a major part of international relations and diplomacy. My 2 questions right now are, first of all, you mentioned that there is a a new strategy for cooperation with the Caribbean, which is about to be laid out. So you cannot really develop on that. But I wondered what South-South cooperation with the Caribbean from South Africa's side has consisted of in the past. I ask because I recall that in Jamaica there was a South-South cooperation in the area of sports, for example. And no doubt there are many other very valuable initiatives which may have gone on. I was wondering if you could mention a couple. And my other question concerned when you laid out the principles in South Africa's foreign policy, you said one is to make Africa a safer continent, a safer place. And I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on South Africa's engagement in African security strengthening. What form does it take? How does South Africa engage with the African Union and with the South African Development Community in addressing security issues at present?
Okay. Firstly, with the first question, I think in a nutshell, it's about our historical cooperation with CARICOM. We really have a long-standing relationship with CARICOM. And most of it dates back to pre-independence, even for the CARICOM countries. I remember, when Jamaica became a free country, countries like Grenada followed, Barbados. These were countries that actually became strong advocates within the worldwide anti-apartheid movement. If the leaders of these countries, Mike and Manley, spoke, the rest of the world listened. And the rest of the world took action against any action that took place in South Africa by the apartheid regime. So that's one element where we have enjoyed strong support from the Caribbean. So in other words, really, we don't date from diplomatic relationship that has emanated in the last 25 years. The relationship dates back to the early 60s and possibly also even to the late 50s. For some of the people who went to university together in England, they met as Caribbeans and South Africans, and they went back home and built the liberation movement. Currently, we do have some very strong cooperation agreements with the Caribbean countries. And I would also include Cuba in this case, because Cuba is a very strong ally of CARICOM. In Jamaica, for example, we've got some education and cooperation agreements, agriculture, health agreements. Cuba, for example, also we have the same similar agreements. They send a lot of doctors to South Africa. We know that's what Cuba does. So we get a lot, we still get a lot, and they actually go to rural areas where most doctors don't want to go. The Cubans are prepared to go. So that's been an incentive for South African doctors to go. We also have agreements with the, I'm thinking of another country perhaps, Suriname. We have one on culture, on arts and culture, which is due for renewal soon. But of course, there's been a change of government there now. So we will have to first meet with the new government and then take it from there. But I think the idea that most Caribbean countries would like to see from their cooperation with Africa, with South Africa and the African countries, is to establish stronger heritage ties, to be able to exchange the history, to support each other in building of museums, in the building of images that reflect African values. And also, I think this also extends to things like the music industry, the film industry, the fashion industry, you know, things that Africans want. You know, you're not representative at all. You think you're going to the Paris, what do you call it? These fashion shows, or the New York show. It's for New York. So Africans need to develop their own, you know, design and heritage, and all kinds of industries which reflect what they want as Africans. So these are the things that we need to work on as African. It's, again, you know, trade is one thing, because trade encompasses that too. You know, being able to buy from each other, buy material from Africa, buy products from the Caribbean, you know, invest in agriculture in the Caribbean, you know, buy fruit that we don't have, things that we don't produce, and the Caribbean does the same. So I think we're on the way there, and I think that's part of this strategy for cooperation with CARICOM, is to say, we simply sit down and say, okay, we can't go to the table with CARICOM empty-handed. Let's identify the niche areas where we can develop a relationship, where we would be strongest. And as I said before, I think one of the most important and the strongest niche that we really have to look at is to open our airspaces. We need Caribbean airline to fly to Africa. We need South African Airways to fly to the Caribbean. And once that happens, the dam is broken, things will happen. You know, I've seen it happen in other places where I've been, you know. You only, you know, in Africa, we didn't have any missions, zero, you know. And a lot of South Africans were very pessimistic about Africa because, you know, there's this whole negative narrative going around in the world about Africa. So people say, oh, you open a mission there, what are you going to do? You know, there's nothing. What are you going to do? Now we've got missions in every country in Africa, and South Africa is doing business with all of them. And that is why our trade relationship is opened. So we need to do the same for CARICOM. On the issue of making Africa a safer place, there is a security architecture that has been adopted by the African Union. And this security architecture actually is about silencing the agenda of silencing the guns. And it said silencing the guns 2020. So this was the year where that should have been achieved. But evidently, the Arab Spring has changed the trajectory of that agenda, because we were really on the path to a democracy in Africa. Most countries now in Africa have gone democratic. We have got less and less dictatorships. You can count them in my five fingers, perhaps, if at all there are that many where there are no democratically elected governments in Africa. So the guns have been silenced in that sense. Certainly, democracy is still unstable in a lot of countries, as we have seen in some of the West African countries, where, you know, during the election periods, the passions are inflamed to the extent of threatening or derailing the democratic process. But once the elections are over, some senses prevail and people get back to the drawing table in trying to move their countries forward. But the new element of the guns now are the guns that are controlled by the ISIS-type, Islamist-type movement. And they are out of reach of any government. And they are not expressing any interest in talking to anybody. They just shoot and kill. They are not talking about their only way of clearing and taking territory. Just kill, sweep, and take. And that is a very difficult situation. And of course, it's an illegitimate way of trying to achieve. They don't represent democracy, that's number one. They are not even theocracies. Sometimes it's very difficult. If you talk to Muslim people, they don't feel represented by what these groups are doing, because this is not what being a Muslim is about. So it's a very big challenge. There is no immediate solution that is foreseeable in the medium term. But I think the African Union defense architecture provides for collective defense. South African Defense Forces participated, for example, in peacekeeping missions around the continent. We've been to the Congo, we've been to Central Africa. I think there are calls for us to assist with Mozambique, and the government is reviewing that, and it is very close to our border. But again, you know, Nigeria to the west, you know, in West Africa, they have ECOWAS, and Nigeria has been very strong in providing their military to assist in those states in the desert, in Sub-Sahara. The unfortunate creeping trend in fighting the Islamist group is the United States wanting to establish what they call the Africa Command, to actually create a physical military presence on the continent, which is something that we strongly resist within the African Union. France has been assisting countries on a bilateral basis by countries that have requested assistance from France from the former French colonies in those countries. But we increase to encourage African countries to look for African solutions to African problems, to deal with the issues of instability by using our own forces and not asking other people's children from around the world to come and die or on our behalf. So, and I'm sure it's always about resources at the end of the day. Certainly, we need cooperation with countries of the West. We will always need because security, global security is a global problem. When they leave one region, they go to the next, and then they go and conduct operations across the ocean elsewhere, and they maintain a base in another region. So we do need to cooperate with one another, and that will always be there. But in terms of the maintaining the sovereignty of African states, that is very, very important. I hope that answers your question. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. In light of the limited time we have remaining, we have many more questions than time. So what I will do is to pose 2 more questions from persons who have not asked questions before, because we only have 10 minutes remaining. We'll seek your response and we will go to the vote of thanks so that we can end at 1:45. So our next question is from Ambassador Dr. P.I. Gomes, and he asks, what are some examples of achievements for South Africa and developing countries that are derived from the BRICS group? And his question has a second part, is the BRICS disintegrating or consolidating?
The main, what you call, sorry. Go to BRICS.
So this is the first question, and we will just go on to the second question. The other question is from Mr. Kenneth Wallace Whitfield.
Yeah.
And he asks, how does South Africa envision the Africa FTA developing? Is there a mechanism to protect African companies from impediments by international franchise companies?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, the first question was about BRICS.
Yes.
And the second one was?
The second one was about the South Africa, the Africa FTA. How is it developing? How does South Africa envision the Africa FTA developing? Mm-hmm. Is there a mechanism to protect African companies from international competition?
All right. On the first question on BRICS, I just created this very short synopsis of what the benefits of BRICS are for South Africa. We joined BRICS right from the beginning. Initially, it was BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And we spoke to these countries and said, we cannot continue the trend of excluding Africa from development, intra-regional development agenda. And they were in full agreement that at least an African country needs to be represented there. So you've got actually 3 countries from Asia, with Russia as Asia, Europe, and then you've got South America and Asia, China, of course. Yeah, so we've got this, the South Corridor, really, mainly in this with Russia. Now, the benefits for South Africa is that we really needed very strong economic partnerships to enhance our trade and investment. Russia is not a traditional investor in the same sense as you would see with Europe. And I think culturally, in their own culture, Russians are not into investing. But I think through BRICS, we are able to say to Russia, look, there are certain areas where we can cooperate. You've got great knowledge in science and technology. We would like those things to prevail in terms of being accessible to South Africa. So BRICS bring these things to us: manufacturing, mineral processing, science, technology, and innovation, including intellectual property. There is what is called the Track 2 institutions of BRICS. These are the business councils of all these countries. Like in countries, all countries have got business councils. So these business councils get together and talk about their interests as businesses. You've got think tanks, university think tanks, institutes like this one, also sitting as a BRICS countries to dialogue about international affairs. And then, of course, now we also have the BRICS Bank, what is called the New Development Bank, right? So its head office is in Shanghai, and India has got a regional office there, and South Africa also has got some outreach office. And hopefully we will have a BRICS Bank for the Africa region at some point in the future. So BRICS is also catalytic in the sense that it is striving for equitable representation in the global system. So these are countries that can actually have a very good leverage to the G7, and they can always organize meetings within, for example, the ambit of the United Nations Security Council on political affairs, of course. And then when it comes to World Trade Organizations, they leverage on behalf of the developing nations. So we've also used BRICS to say, we don't want BRICS to follow an elitist path where, we very proud of ourselves as a country. We belong to the big league, and exclude the development agenda of the African coast. So we make sure that the BRICS agenda is aligned with the African Union agenda. And at one point, we were the first country in BRICS when South Africa was hosting a BRICS meeting. We introduced a tradition within BRICS to invite at least one or two more heads of states. If the meeting is in Africa, we invite a head of state or two as guests in the BRICS meeting. So to ensure that, South Africa does not only give the only voice, but they can also hear from other leaders of the continent. Financial institutions I've mentioned, and we've got huge, major projects on infrastructure that we need the New Development Bank to support. Our rail infrastructure is one, road infrastructure, electricity, and the ports. I think we're also trying to create a mechanism for what is called a credit rating agencies. Credit ratings agencies have got their own way of looking at credit rating. They look at you, are you credit worthy for me to give you my money, right? So BRICS has to create a credit, certainly, I mean, inevitably, we will also apply some of that formula, but also it has to take into account what are the development needs of the continent? How is it possible to support countries, even if their credit rating is so bad, but how do we take them along the path such that they can get on the path of credit worthiness and development? So these are some of the things. Then, of course, I think the last one is the outreach dialogue, which is always held simultaneously with summits. Anybody who wants to meet sometimes as a BRICS country, the women of BRICS can decide, okay, let's have a South Shore social as BRICS women and talks about challenges of BRICS women. You know, like gender-based violence is a problem in many of our countries, and share experiences about that. Okay. Of course, cooperation, I said, in research, medicine, vaccines, and so on. I will stop right there. FTA, the African FTA, it has to be ratified by all members. I think there was one country that had not ratified. I'm not sure if it has ratified by now. My last recollection, Nigeria was thinking about it, but I'm sure I'm out of date because that was more than 3 years ago. Perhaps they have by now. But the FTA is, you could say it is in force. All regions, all 5 regions have got free trade agreements. That is the 5 regions. In Southern Africa particularly, we have the Southern African Development Cooperation, SADC free trade, and there's also another one which is historically for countries that are locked within the South African economy. That is Lesotho, Swaziland, and then it also included Botswana, because Botswana is landlocked. They depend on South African ports. And then, of course, until 1990, Namibia was a South African colony. So they have remained in a commonwealth, so to say, rather a new relationship with South Africa. So these are very important because free trade really is about creating common standards and equitable standards of trade across the continent. You know, if you give Botswana a deal on exportation of maize, you sell maize to Botswana, but you're also selling maize to Zimbabwe, then the terms are not equal. And it's exactly the same, the delivery system is the same from end to end. There is no reason for price differentiation. So free trade agreements make sure that things like that don't really happen, and a whole lot of other things. We have South African ports, Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, a lot of countries in Africa, inland, including those who have got oceans, but they don't have well-developed ports. Their goods come through South Africa and they go up all the way to the north. So we have to cooperate and ensure that the free trade agreements don't create a situation where you have to pay tariffs, customs and excise from border to border to border. So it works in the interest of everybody. And I think everybody has signed to it. And as far as I know, I mean, there is a mechanism to implement this, and it's a full-time job to actually manage an agreement like this. It's a special officer on its own. So within the Department of Trade and Industry, and in every other country, there is an office on that. So yeah, unless there was a specific question about that, but it is working. One, the Africa Free Trade Agreement and the sub-regional ones. And then I think the idea also is to make sure that, we don't have trade agreements that contradict each other. There is a time when, and I think some of the issues are not yet resolved. You'd find one country belonging to 3 regional organizations. For example, Tanzania would belong to East Africa, and at the same time, it's a member of SADC. And you have the Congo, which is in Central Africa, and it also belongs to SADC, and so on. So these things are busy clarifying themselves, and the countries are being encouraged to make some choices to some extent. So that I know sometimes it's a very difficult thing to do for historical reasons, for some to have been a member with one organization for 20 years, and then you find that actually you are closer to this group, and it makes more economic sense for you to work with the other groups. So all of those things are being ironed out. In the end, it might actually mean nothing whether you belong to both, because the African Free Trade Agreement will supersede all other agreements in terms of your trade relationships. Thank you.
Your Excellency Xoliswa Ngwevela, this was extremely rich, both your presentation and your response to questions. I would like to just thank the audience as well before we go to the official vote of thanks for making this seminar, this dialogue, diplomatic dialogue, so interesting and so rich with your insightful questions and interesting questions that you provided. Also, I'd like to offer my deepest apologies, our deepest apologies to you for all those who asked questions that could not be answered because of limited time. We are extremely apologetic, and please forgive us that we were not able to address all your questions. And on that note, I would like to invite Ms. Samantha Alaha, who is an MPhil student at the Institute of International Relations, to deliver the vote of thanks. Samantha?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to Professor Jessica Byron, Director of the Institute of International Relations, Her Excellency Xoliswa Ngwevela, High Commissioner for the Republic of South Africa, members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, representatives from the Embassy of Colombia, other distinguished guests, the Secretariat and staff of the Institute of International Relations, and other members of the Institute of International Relations and the University of the West Indies community. It's my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks for today's virtual diplomatic dialogue on South Africa's foreign policy and its global relations on behalf of the Institute of International Relations. I'm certain that all students of the Institute would agree with me when I say that these types of events hold tremendous value for us in our learning process. And to Professor Byron and the Secretariat staff of the Institute of International Relations, including the technical team, we must say thank you for the thought, preparation, and organization that you devote into crafting these events. To High Commissioner Ngwevela, Your Excellency, thank you for sharing an edifying and, judging from the engagement of the audience, a clearly thought-provoking presentation with us this afternoon. I believe that you have provided a number of ideas for us to reflect on in our considerations of how foreign policy, diplomacy, political movements, cooperation, especially South cooperation, and multilateralism can be approached. It's very interesting to see how, as you explained, foreign policy has to adapt to the fluidity of global dynamics. Also interesting are South Africa's foundational principles that guide how it approaches its foreign relations, Especially outstanding for me personally, and Dr. Montes also mentioned this, was the point concerning the values of Ubuntu. I am because you are. And I think it was easy to see that this has featured not only in global relations, as you have described in your presentation, but also in how domestic and regional challenges are approached. From the perspective of a student, I appreciate the information and the insight that you have offered in such a comprehensible way. Once again, we express our gratitude to everyone who made this virtual diplomatic dialogue possible and to everyone who attended and engaged today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So on that note, I would like to just say a final thank you to our audience, both international, regional, and national, to all our students, and to all those who participated, and a hearty thanks and appreciation to the ambassador for being here with us today. Thank you very much.